After socioeconomic pressures, Cuba is now ready for dialogue with the US, but they remain firm on one core issue: the political system. Amid waves of speculation about Havana potentially changing to move closer to Washington, the actual message sent by Cuban leadership carries a completely different nuance. By directly calling on the military to increase combat readiness, President Miguel Díaz-Canel Bermúdez is seen not only as emphasizing national defense, but also indirectly asserting the state's hardline stance during this sensitive period. According to observers, the focus does not lie in military activities, but in the accompanying declaration. Cuba will not participate in any negotiations that lead to regime change. This position is viewed as a red line that Havana is unwilling to cross despite mounting economic pressure. Reality shows that Cuba is standing at a major turning point. It must find a way to save its exhausted economy while simultaneously protecting the existing power structure. Consequently, many analyses suggest that Cuba is pursuing a distinct two-tier strategy: controlled economic opening while resolutely maintaining its political foundation. In the context of increasingly fierce geopolitical competition, this choice is not only significant domestically, but also serves as a clear foreign policy message. Havana can engage in dialogue, but it will not accept being reshaped from the outside. From the stern declaration regarding the non-negotiability of the political system, it is evident that Cuba is pursuing a dual-objective problem, one that is both existential and principled. On one hand, Havana is steadfast in defending the regime's foundation built over many decades. The War of All People doctrine continues to be emphasized as a pillar of thought, not just in national defense, but also in social organization, where the state maintains a central role and every citizen is placed within the structure of protecting the fatherland. In this approach, the political system is not merely an institutional choice, but is viewed as a condition for the nation's existence, thus becoming a non-negotiable factor. However, alongside that steadfastness is an unavoidable reality. The Cuban economy is in a state of prolonged hardship. The energy crisis, food shortages, supply chain disruptions, and financial constraints have created immense pressure on social life. In this context, opening up for investment, encouraging the private economy, and seeking external capital flows are no longer choices but have become urgent requirements. The Cuban government has made significant adjustments from allowing private enterprises to operate to calling for foreign investment, including from the Cuban community overseas. The notable point is that these two objectives do not always run smoothly in parallel, but exist in a state of constant tension. Opening the economy inevitably brings changes to social structure, resource distribution, and the level of autonomy for non-state actors. Meanwhile, maintaining the political system requires strict control over those fluctuations. The core contradiction thus gradually emerges. Cuba wants to open to survive economically, but needs to stay closed to preserve itself politically. This is the fragile balance that Havana must maintain. In that context, relations with the US emerge as a strategic bargaining space, where the interests of both sides both converge and conflict. On Cuba's side, the need is relatively clear. What Havana needs first and foremost is the easing of the embargo, a factor that has stifled the economy for over half a century. Along with that is access to energy, especially oil sources, as well as clearing international trade and financial channels. In other words, Cuba is seeking oxygen so its economy can function again. However, the US does not only view Cuba through an economic lens. What Washington is more deeply concerned with is the power structure and strategic orientation of this island nation. The easing of the embargo, if it occurs, is likely to come with political conditions, ranging from demands for institutional reform to a certain degree to limiting the roles of partners like Russia and China on Cuban territory. For the US, this is not just about improving bilateral relations, but also an opportunity to reshape its influence in a region traditionally viewed as its strategic backyard. Therefore, the nature of the engagement process between Cuba and the US, if any, is not merely ordinary diplomatic dialogue. It is a complex exchange where economic interests are weighed against geopolitical influence. Cuba seeks to trade for relief from economic pressure without losing political control, while the US seeks to expand its influence without direct intervention. This tug-of-war ensures that every move must be carefully calculated, as even a single concession beyond the threshold could alter the entire balance. To understand why Cuba always holds a special position in US calculations, one must look broader at the geopolitical context. History has proven the importance of this island through the Cuban Missile Crisis, one of the tensest moments of the Cold War when the world stood on the brink of nuclear conflict. That event was not just a confrontation between two superpowers, but also deeply etched into Washington's strategic thinking, a reality. Cuba, with its geographical proximity to US territory, cannot be overlooked. To this day, this geographical factor retains its value. The short distance between Cuba and the state of Florida makes any military, intelligence, or strategic cooperation here sensitive to US national security. Information regarding the presence or cooperation of Russia and China in Cuba at any level is enough to increase concern in Washington. Amidst the clearly defining competition between major powers, Cuba once again becomes an intersection of larger strategic calculations. This shows that Cuba is not just a story of ideology or development models, but also a vital link in the regional security structure. For the US, ensuring that Cuba does not become a springboard for any adversary is a long-term priority. Conversely, for Cuba, maintaining relations with various partners is a way to preserve strategic space and avoid dependence on a single side. In this web of intertwined interests, Havana's choices become particularly difficult. Every step toward economic opening can bring political consequences, while every foreign policy decision is directly affected by geopolitical pressure. What is clearest at this moment is that Cuba does not face a simple choice between change or no change, but is struggling to survive in a state of complex equilibrium, where every adjustment must be sufficient to adapt, but must not exceed the limits they themselves have set. In the context of increasingly complex strategic calculations, a major question arises: where will Cuba go in the near future? Although there are many assessments from some Western sources regarding the possibility of Havana changing its regime in exchange for economic benefits, this scenario lacks a realistic basis. Official signals from the leadership show that Cuba is not preparing for a rapid political transition. On the contrary, it is actively drawing very clear lines for any dialogue. Instead of an abrupt turn, a more plausible scenario is a process of controlled adjustment. Cuba will likely continue to partially open its economy, attract investment, and loosen certain mechanisms to create room for development while still maintaining the current political foundation. This is a pragmatic approach, reforming just enough to maintain growth and social stability, but not letting those changes erode the power structure. Simultaneously, Havana also tends to gradually reduce dependence on any single partner to avoid being dominated in the long run. From this perspective, many analyses suggest that Cuba could reference the experience of Vietnam. After decades of confrontation, Vietnam normalized relations with the US without falling into a state of dependency, while maintaining relations with many different partners. The strategy of multilateralization and diversification has helped Hanoi maintain its space of autonomy, avoiding being drawn into the orbit of any single superpower. From that case, several strategic lessons can be drawn. First, it is not necessary to choose sides in the context of intensifying competition between major powers. Second, not allowing major powers to establish military bases on one's territory is a key factor in avoiding becoming a conflict hotspot. And most importantly, maintaining autonomy in policy planning, placing national interests above all ideological affiliations. However, applying lessons is one thing, implementation is another. Cuba is currently in a distinct dilemma, which can be seen as a survival line. On one side is the urgent need to save an economy facing many difficulties. On the other is the requirement to protect the political system considered the core. At the same time, the island nation must balance its relationship between the US and partners like Russia and China, all of whom have strategic interests in the region. Therefore, Cuba's future depends not only on internal decisions, but is also strongly influenced by the international environment. The big question remains open. Can Havana maintain its strategic independence in an increasingly polarized world, or will it gradually be swept into the vortex of competition between major powers? The answer will likely not come overnight, but will be shaped through each of Cuba's cautious steps in the time to come.